My daughter forged my signature on a $500,000 mortgage, then stood in my kitchen and told me I had 30 days to start paying it. When I refused, she sued me for $850,000. The judge looked me in the eye and asked one question that made her attorney drop his pen. Before I go any further, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. The first thing I noticed that morning was the silver SUV in my driveway. Not because it was unusual exactly, but because I hadn't been told to expect company, and at 67, I'd earned the right to know when someone was coming to my door. I just finished my morning loop around the lake, 3 miles give or take, depending on whether I cut through the Hendricks' yard or went the long way past the old Methodist church. October in Asheville has a particular kind of light to it, golden and thin, the kind that makes you stop walking just to look at the mountains for a second. I'd been doing the same walk every morning since my wife passed 4 years back. It kept me sane, kept my knees from rusting shut. The SUV belonged to my daughter. I recognized the dent in the rear quarter panel from when she backed into a fire hydrant 2 Christmases ago. I climbed the porch steps, my breath still a little quick from the last hill, and there they were. My daughter and her husband standing on the porch like a couple of door-to-door salesmen, except they had a key and hadn't used it. She was wearing a camel coat I'd never seen, the kind with the leather buttons that probably cost more than my mortgage payment used to. Her husband stood behind her with one of those big leather portfolios tucked under his arm, the kind lawyers carry, except he wasn't a lawyer. He sold commercial real estate, or said he did. I'd stopped asking what he actually did for money about 3 years back, because the answers kept changing. Dad. She gave me that smile she used to give me when she was 9 and wanted something. We were just about to give up on you. Didn't know I was supposed to be expecting anyone. It's a surprise. A good surprise. Can we come in? I unlocked the door and held it open for them. Habit, mostly. My mother raised me to feed and water anyone who showed up under my roof. And that training doesn't wash out even when the guest is your own kid, acting like a stranger. I put on coffee. I always put on coffee. My son-in-law settled at the kitchen table like he was choosing real estate, picking the chair with the best view of the backyard, dropping that leather portfolio in front of him with a thud that made my salt-taker hop. My daughter perched on the edge of her seat. That should have been my first real warning. People who are about to ask you for something always sit on the edges of chairs. They don't relax. They can't. Dad, we have news. Big news. She clasped her hands together like a kid at Christmas. We bought a house. The house in Biltmore Forest. I stopped mid-pour. Biltmore Forest is the kind of neighborhood where the gardeners drive better cars than I do. I knew, without being told, that this house cost more than anything she should have been able to afford on her marketing manager's salary and her husband's whatever it was. Congratulations, I said carefully. When did this happen? We closed 3 weeks ago. 6 bedrooms. Heated pool. The most beautiful kitchen, Dad. You'd love it. We're so happy. 3 weeks ago, I repeated. I set the coffee cups down. The handle on mine had a little chip in it. I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. He bought a house 3 weeks ago and didn't tell me. We wanted to surprise you. Her smile flickered, just for half a second, then came back twice as bright. And we wanted to do it in person. Her husband cleared his throat, opened the portfolio, slid out a thick stack of papers and laid them on the table between us, careful not to set them on a coffee ring. There is, one thing we need to talk about, he said. He had a way of talking like he was always presenting something at a meeting. Like the words had been rehearsed in a mirror. My daughter took over. Dad, the mortgage is a little more than we expected. The first 3 months were interest only, which was great, but the regular payments start next month, and they're more than what we anticipated. We're looking at about $4,200 a month. I sipped my coffee. Said nothing. Sometimes, in my old line of work, the best thing you could do in a negotiation was let the other person fill the silence. They will, eventually. They always do. She filled it. You have plenty saved up. Mom always said you oversaved. And it's not like you spend money. You haven't taken a vacation since she passed. The house is paid off. You're just sitting on it, Dad. And we need help. You need help with what? With the mortgage. Just for a few years. Until my husband's commissions catch up. He's got some big deals closing. It's just temporary. There it was. Laid on the table like an offering. Like I was supposed to be honored. I set the cup down very, very carefully because my hand wanted to slam it. I'd spent 38 years as an auditor for a regional bank, and you don't keep that job that long without learning how to keep your face still when somebody hands you nonsense. Let me make sure I'm hearing you. You bought a house I never knew about, in a neighborhood you can't afford, and now you want me to pay for it. Not pay for it. My son-in-law jumped in, smooth as a salesman. Help with it. As an investment. Think about it. The house will appreciate. We're talking about a property that will be worth $1.2 million in 10 years. You're contributing to your daughter's net worth. Your grandchildren's inheritance. I don't have grandchildren. Well, eventually. I looked at my daughter then, and for the first time I really looked at her. The way I used to look at a balance sheet that didn't quite add up. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I'd seen it and refused to recognize it. How did you qualify for a mortgage like this? I asked. What's the loan amount? $520, her husband said before she could stop him. She shot him a look that he didn't catch. And your combined income is what, $120,000? Closer to $150, she said too quickly. That ratio doesn't work. No lender approved that loan at that income. Not in this market. What did you put down? The silence after that question had a different quality. It was thicker. Her husband's eyes flicked to the portfolio. My daughter's hand went up to her necklace and stayed there. We had help from his parents, she said. And we co-signed with someone. Co-signed with who? A family member. Which family member? She didn't answer. I reached across the table and slid the top page of their stack toward me. Auditor's habit. The pages were a copy of the mortgage application. I flipped to the last page, the signature page, and there it was. My name. My signature. Or something pretending to be it. Whoever had done it had been sloppy. They'd gotten the loop on the capital wrong. I'd been signing my name the same way since I was 19 years old, and I knew the shape of it. The way you know the shape of your own teeth with your tongue. I looked up at her. Just looked. She started crying immediately. Real tears. Fast. The kind that come from being caught and not from being sorry. Dad. Dad, listen. I can explain. You forged my signature. It was just to get the loan started. We were going to tell you. We were going to have you sign the real one once we explained. You forged my name on a $520,000 mortgage. Her husband stood up. He'd switched modes. The smiling salesman was gone, and what was underneath was something colder. Look, we're family. This is family business. Nobody needs to throw words like forged around. The signature was a placeholder. You and your daughter have a relationship that goes back her whole life. The bank's not going to ask questions if you just start paying. They don't audit signatures on payments. They audit defaults. Get out of my house. Dad. Both of you. Out. My daughter was still crying. She was good at it. She'd always been good at it. When she was 12 and wanted to go to a concert I'd said no to, she'd cried for 2 days straight, and I'd finally caved. And somewhere in those 48 hours, she'd learned that her tears were a tool. The way some people learn to use a hammer, they left. The SUV pulled out of the driveway. I locked the front door, double-checked it, then went to the kitchen and sat down at the table where their papers still were. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, even though my hands were shaking too hard to drink it properly. Then I went to my office and started making copies of everything they'd left behind. I want to tell you something about that day because it matters for the rest of the story. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office until 2 in the morning, scanning every page of that mortgage application into my computer, and what I found made me feel like somebody had put their hand inside my chest and squeezed. The application listed me as a co-borrower. not a co-signer, a co-borrower. It claimed I had a savings account at a bank I'd never banked with. It claimed I had income from a rental property I didn't own. It listed my social security number, which was correct. My date of birth, correct. My address, correct. And there were 2 other signatures on that application I didn't recognize at all. A notary, a loan officer, people I'd never met, attesting that they had watched me sign documents I had never seen. This wasn't a daughter who panicked and faked a signature on a Tuesday afternoon. This was a fraud scheme. Somebody had built it carefully, and my daughter had either built it or paid somebody to build it. And either way, my own child had stolen my identity to put me on the hook for $500,000. I sat there with the screen gluing on my face, and I thought about her at 5 years old, in a yellow sundress, running across the front yard of the house we used to live in. I thought about teaching her to ride a bike. I thought about her wedding day, when she'd cried into my shoulder and told me she loved me and I'd believed her without reservation, the way a father is allowed to believe his daughter exactly once, and then never quite the same again. And then I closed the file and started a list of every attorney in Nashville who specialized in elder financial abuse. There were more than I would have guessed. 2 weeks passed. I didn't hear from her. I didn't call. I spent those 2 weeks gathering. I pulled every bank statement going back 10 years, every tax return, every email, every text message I'd ever exchanged with her about money. There were almost none about money. She'd never asked me for a dime. Not for the wedding, not for grad school, not for the new car. She'd always told friends that her dad was a man who'd worked hard and shouldn't be bothered. I'd been proud of her for that. Stupid, in retrospect. I found an attorney through a referral from my old supervisor at the bank. Her name was a woman I'll call my counsel, because she earned my privacy in this. She was somewhere north of 50, with gray eyes that didn't blink much, and she ran her practice out of a brick building downtown that used to be a hardware store. The exposed beam ceiling still smelled faintly of sawdust. She read through everything I'd brought her. Took her about an hour. I sat in her waiting room and read 3 years of golf magazines without absorbing a word. When she called me back in, she just sat there for a moment and looked at me. She paused, used my last name. I want to be honest with you. This is one of the cleanest fraud cases I've seen in a decade. You document like a man who knew this day was coming. I was an auditor. I document everything. You're going to win this. I want you to understand that, but I also want you to understand what winning is going to cost you, emotionally. Because what's on these documents constitutes a felony. Several felonies. If we pursue this fully, your daughter and her husband are facing prison time. Real prison time, not probation. Are you prepared for that? I'd had 2 weeks to think about it. The thinking hadn't gotten easier. I need you to understand something too, I said. She made me a fool in my own house. She forged my name. She had somebody notarize a signature I never wrote. That's not a daughter making a mistake. That's a calculated theft. So yes, I'm prepared. Good. Then let me tell you what's about to happen. They're going to sue you first. They're going to sue me. They're going to. Because they know you've seen the signature. They know you know, and the only play they have left is to get out ahead of you and put their story on the record first. They'll claim you promised to pay. They'll claim you made oral agreements. They'll claim you signed willingly and then changed your mind. Their attorney will get aggressive. There's a particular type of lawyer who specializes in this. They look for desperate plaintiffs with a thin case and try to bully their way to a settlement before discovery starts. I've seen it 100 times. We do not settle. Not for 10 cents. Are we clear? We're clear. She was right. Of course she was right. 3 weeks later, a deputy from the sheriff's office handed me an envelope on my own porch. Civil complaint filed in Buncombe County. My daughter and her husband, jointly, were suing me for $850,000 in damages, breach of oral contract, fraudulent inducement, intentional infliction of emotional distress. $850,000. Their attorney had even attached a list of damages: the mortgage they couldn't pay, the pool maintenance contract, the lawn service, the country club fees they'd already paid for, the cost of a private school for the children they didn't have yet, the therapy my daughter would now require to deal with the trauma of her father's betrayal. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time and started laughing, and the laughter turned into something that wasn't laughter, and I had to sit down on the porch step for a while. My counsel took it in stride. She'd told me it was coming. She filed a counterclaim within 72 hours, and she included 3 things in it that made me love her a little. First, a request for sanctions against opposing counsel for filing a frivolous suit. Second, a counterclaim for fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Third, a motion to subpoena the bank records of every account my daughter and her husband had touched in the last 5 years. The third one is what cracked it open. I'd been working with a private investigator in parallel. My counsel insisted on it. She said, in these cases, you always find more than you think you're going to find. And the worst thing in a courtroom is to be surprised. He was a quiet man, late 50s, who'd retired from the FBI's white-collar division and started taking private work to keep busy. He worked out of his garage. He charged me $3,000 up front and never sent another invoice the whole time. What he found was this. My son-in-law was not, as he claimed, a commercial real estate broker. He had a real estate license that had been suspended 2 years ago for improperly handling escrow funds. He'd been working as a salesman for a crypto trading platform that the SEC had been investigating since last spring. He'd put $180,000 of his own money into a coin called something I can't even pronounce, and watched it go to zero in March. He'd put another $90,000 he didn't have, borrowed against credit cards in his and my daughter's names, into a different coin, trying to make it back. That went to zero in May. By June, they were $300,000 underwater, and their lease on a rental was about to end. And instead of telling me, instead of telling anyone, they decided that the move was to buy a bigger house, to get a bigger mortgage, to put more cash in their hands at closing, because the down payment had been padded with cash back from the seller through a side agreement that was almost certainly illegal in itself. They'd bought a house they couldn't afford because the act of buying it generated cash they could use to keep the lie running for another 6 months. And they put my name on it because my credit was perfect, and because they knew I'd never check. When my investigator handed me the report, in his garage, with a Carolina Panthers calendar on the wall behind him and a half-drunk can of root beer on his workbench, I asked him if he'd seen this kind of thing before. All the time, he said. Always with parents. Always. Why? Because parents are the last people who prosecute, and the kids know that. I drove home and I sat in the driveway for an hour before I went inside. Then I called my counsel and told her to add identity theft to the criminal referral. The trial was set for the second week of February. I want to skip past most of what happened in between, because some of it was tedious, and some of it was painful in a way I don't enjoy revisiting. I'll tell you the parts that matter. My daughter called me twice during that stretch. The first time was around Thanksgiving. She left a voicemail that started out crying and ended with her telling me I was destroying our family, and that her mother would be ashamed of me, and that I was going to die alone and unloved if I didn't do the right thing. I saved the voicemail. My counsel transcribed it and added it to the file. The second call came in late January, 2 weeks before the trial. This one was different. She didn't cry. She wanted to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. No lawyers, just family. Just a chance to talk it out. My counsel told me to go. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. She told me to put my phone in my shirt pocket, with the recorder running, and let my daughter say whatever she was going to say. We met at a coffee shop near the river. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a paper cup like she was cold even though the place was warm. She looked thinner than I remembered. Tired. Her makeup didn't quite cover the dark circles under her eyes. She started gentle. She apologized for the mortgage. She said she'd panicked. She said her husband had pressured her. She said she should have come to me sooner. I let her talk. I drank my coffee. I let her run all the way through the gentle version. Then she shifted. Dad, I need you to drop the criminal stuff. The civil case, fine, we can settle. We'll drop the lawsuit. You drop yours. We walk away. But the criminal stuff, you have to drop that. They're talking about charging me with felony identity theft. I could lose my job. I could go to prison. Do you understand what you're doing to me? I understand what you did to me. It was a mistake. It was 11 different documents over 4 months. It wasn't a mistake. It was a job. She leaned forward, her voice went low. If you don't drop this, I'm going to tell people things about you that you don't want told. About Mom. About what really happened in our family. I have stories, Dad. I have stories you don't want my cousins hearing. I have stories that would make people at your church stop saying hello to you in the parking lot. I sat there for a moment looking at her, and I felt something settle in my chest. Something that had been wobbling for 38 years finally found its level. Sweetheart, I said, and it was the last time I used that word for her, you can tell whatever stories you want. The people who matter to me will know the truth. The people who don't matter to me can believe whatever they like. I've lived 67 years in this town, and I've never been ashamed of a single day of it. You go ahead. Tell your stories. I stood up, left a 5 on the table for the coffee, walked out. When I got home, my counsel was waiting on my voicemail. I called her back and played her the recording. She was quiet for a long time. That's witness tampering, she said. On top of everything else, that's witness tampering and extortion. I know. Are you sure you want to keep going? Yes. The trial lasted 3 days. I won't walk you through all of it because most of a trial is paperwork and procedure, and that doesn't make for much of a story. I'll tell you the parts that stuck. My daughter's attorney was exactly the kind of man my counsel had warned me about. He had a loud voice and a cheap suit, and he talked like he was selling cars. He stood up and told the jury and the judge that this was a story about a cold, miserly father who had promised his only child a future and then yanked it away. He said my daughter had relied on my promises. He said her husband had relied on my promises. He said the family had built a life on what I had pledged, and that pulling out now constituted a breach of every moral obligation a father owed his child. He went on like that for 45 minutes. My daughter cried at the table behind him, on cue, every 6 or 7 minutes. When my counsel stood up, she did not raise her voice. She just walked over to the projector that was set up in the courtroom, and she pulled up the first document. It was the mortgage application with the forged signature. This is the signature of my client, she said. She pointed to a sample I'd given her, my real signature from a deed I'd signed in 1989. And this. She tapped the projector, is what was placed on a $520,000 mortgage application without my client's knowledge or consent. She didn't say forged. She didn't have to. She moved through the documents one at a time, bank statements showing I had never wired the down payment they claimed to come from me, tax returns showing no rental income from a property they claimed I owned, emails between my daughter and her husband, pulled in discovery from their joint Gmail account, in which my son-in-law literally wrote the words, "As long as he doesn't check his credit report, we're fine." She played the recording from the coffee shop. She played the Thanksgiving voicemail. She put my investigator on the stand, and he walked through the gambling, the crypto, the side payments, the falsified income documents. He spoke for 2 hours. He never raised his voice once. I watched my daughter during all of this. I made myself watch her. I owed her that much. Her face went through several stages. Anger first, then disbelief when the emails came up. Then something that looked almost like recognition, the way a person looks when they finally understand the size of the thing they've done. Her husband sat next to her with his jaw tight and his hand on her arm, and after a while he stopped touching her at all. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, salt and pepper hair pulled back, reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She'd been listening without expression for 3 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, after my counsel rested her case, the judge took a recess. When she came back, She looked at the plaintiff's table. Then she looked at me. "Sir," she said, "I'm going to ask you one question. I want a straight answer." "Yes, Your Honor." "In all of your dealings with your daughter, going back to the day she was born, did you ever sign a single document agreeing to pay her bills, her mortgage, her debts, or any portion of her financial obligations as an adult?" I waited a beat. I wanted to make sure I said it right. "No, Your Honor, not one. I raised her. I paid for her education. I paid for her wedding. I gave her a down payment on her first car. Every one of those was a gift, given freely, with no expectation. I never signed a thing promising her $1 of my retirement. I would have given her anything she ever asked for, honestly. She never asked. She took." The judge nodded once. She turned to the plaintiff's table. "Counsel, your case is built entirely on alleged oral promises. The defendant has documented his finances, his communications, and his intentions for the last 30 years. You have produced nothing in writing. You have produced no corroborating witness who can testify to a specific promise on a specific date. Your client's own emails introduced into evidence contradict the premise of your complaint. I'm prepared to rule." My daughter's attorney started to stand up. "Sit down, counsel." He sat down. The judge took off her reading glasses and laid them on the bench. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. The defendant's counterclaim is sustained. The plaintiffs are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in full, which I will determine in a separate order. The matters relating to identity theft, mortgage fraud, witness tampering, and extortion are referred to the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina in coordination with the Buncombe County District Attorney. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The room exhaled. I want to tell you what it felt like in that moment, because I think people imagine these moments differently than they actually are. There was no triumph. I didn't pump my fist. I didn't grin at my daughter across the aisle. I just felt very, very tired, like a man who had been holding his breath for 4 months and was finally allowed to let it out. My daughter didn't look at me as she left. Her husband did. He looked at me with the kind of look a man gives another man when he's decided the other man is the cause of all his troubles. I held his eye until he looked away. In the hallway, my counsel shook my hand. She told me she'd be in touch about the federal piece. She told me to go home and sleep for a week. I drove home through the mountains and I stopped at an overlook on the parkway, even though it was cold, and I sat on the hood of my truck for a long time and watched the sun come down behind the ridges. Here's what happened after. My son-in-law was indicted by a federal grand jury 6 weeks later. The charges took up an entire page. Identity theft, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud. He took a plea deal in May, 18 months in a federal facility in West Virginia, 3 years of supervised release, $220,000 in restitution that he had no realistic way of paying. My daughter was indicted separately. Her attorney negotiated for her. In exchange for testifying against her husband, she received 12 months of probation, a felony conviction on her record, and 300 hours of community service. She lost her job. She lost the house, which went into foreclosure within 90 days of the verdict. Last I heard, she was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a different part of the state, working at a call center, divorced from him before he'd even finished his sentence. I don't say any of this with pleasure. I want you to understand that. I'd have given that girl the moon if she'd asked me. She didn't ask. She tried to take it, and she tried to take it in a way that, had she succeeded, would have left me broke at 67, with no recourse and no recovery time. A month after the trial, I went to see a different attorney about my estate, not my litigation attorney. And the estate planner, we sat in his office for 2 afternoons, and we restructured everything. The bulk of my assets, 85% of them, went into an irrevocable trust to fund scholarships at the community college I'd attended, back when it was a tobacco field with a building on it. Another 10% went to a foundation that provides legal aid to elderly victims of financial fraud. The remaining 5% I left in a small, irrevocable trust for any grandchildren I might one day have. The trust language was specific. The money was for them, not for their parents. It would be administered by a third-party trustee. It could be used for education and medical needs only, and it could not be borrowed against, assigned, or accelerated. My daughter would not have access to it, not directly, not indirectly, not through any creative legal theory anyone could construct. I won't pretend that was an easy document to sign. I sat in that office, and I thought about every birthday party, every dance recital, every fight, every reconciliation, every Sunday dinner I'd ever had with my daughter. I thought about her hand in mine when she was 4, and we walked to the corner store for a popsicle. I thought about the look on her face when she cried in that coffee shop and told me she'd burn my reputation down. You can love a person and still understand that they have shown you who they are. The two things are allowed to exist in the same room. That's something I had to learn at 67, that I'd hoped never to learn at all. About 14 months after the trial, a letter arrived. No return address, but I knew the handwriting before I opened it. She wrote that she was in counseling. She wrote that she had begun to understand the shape of what she'd done. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for anything specific. She asked only if I would consider one phone call. Just one. She said she wasn't expecting forgiveness. She wasn't even expecting a relationship. She just wanted to say, in her own voice, that she was sorry and that she understood she didn't deserve to be heard. I read it 3 times. Then I put it in the same drawer where I keep the deed to the house, and the original mortgage documents and the certified copy of the judgment. I haven't answered it. I haven't thrown it away. Maybe one day I'll pick up the phone. I don't know. I want to tell you I will. I want to tell you there's a clean, redemptive ending where the father and the daughter sit on a porch somewhere and find each other again. There might be. I'm 68 now. I have time, maybe. But here's what I learned, and here's what I want to leave you with, especially if you're my age, or if you're caring for someone my age, or if you're a young person watching this and wondering what the adults in your life are dealing with. Love is not a license to be looted. The people who love you the most are the ones most likely to be willing to let you steal from them, and the only thing standing between you and that theft is your own willingness to say a word that costs you everything to say. The word is no. Sometimes the word is no to your own child. Sometimes it's no, with documentation and an attorney and a forensic accountant. But it's still no. And no is not a betrayal. No is not the end of love. No is, sometimes, the only thing left of love when love has been worn down to a single, hard, honest syllable. I walk that same loop every morning. 3 miles, around the lake, past the old Methodist church. The mountains are still there. The light is still that particular kind of gold. My knees still hold up. The house is quiet, and the house is mine, and the savings I worked 38 years to build are still mine, and they will go where I decide they will go, on the day I decide they will go. That, in the end, is what dignity is. It's not what they tried to take. It's what they couldn't. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my place, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I read every comment. I'll see you in the next story. I've thought a lot about that morning on the porch since the trial ended. The silver SUV in my driveway. My daughter's smile. The leather portfolio under her husband's arm. Everything that happened after followed, in a straight line, from choices that had been made long before any of us sat down at my kitchen table. My daughter didn't wake up one Tuesday and decide to forge my signature. She arrived at that decision after years of small steps. A lie here, a shortcut there. A husband who'd lost almost $300,000 chasing a thing he didn't understand, and a wife who'd convinced herself that protecting his pride was more important than telling the truth. Every choice they made closed off the next honest option, until the only road left was the one that ran straight through my front door and tried to take everything I had built. Cause and effect. That's all it ever is. You don't end up in a courtroom by accident. What I had to learn at 67 was that loving someone does not require you to let them harm you. I'd spent 4 decades believing that being a good father meant absorbing whatever my daughter handed me. I learned, the hard way, that there's a kind of love that protects the person you love from the worst version of themselves by refusing to play along. If I had paid that mortgage, she would have learned that fraud works inside our family. She would have done it again, bigger, to someone who couldn't fight back. My refusal was the first honest thing anyone in that house had heard in years. I want to tell you what I think about now. When I walk my loop around the lake in the mornings, I think about three things, and I think about them in this order. Character first, wisdom second, strength third. Character is the part of you that decides what you will not do, even when no one is watching, even when the people you love are asking you to. Wisdom is the part that sees what's actually happening, underneath what people say is happening. I had the wisdom buried in me from 38 years of reading numbers for a living, but I almost let love talk me out of using it. Don't let love talk you out of what you already know. And strength is what carries you through the months in between, knowing what's right and seeing it through. The phone calls, the voicemails, the Thanksgiving table with one less plate, the letter you can't bring yourself to answer yet. My daughter chose her road. I chose mine. The house is still mine. The savings are still mine. And the man who walks the loop around the lake every morning is, finally, mine too. That's the inheritance I had to take back from her. It turned out to be the only one that ever really mattered.